Roman records detail women's breasts cut off in public squares. Nobody flinched. Executioners kept trophies. Judges bragged about their cruelty, and crowds went home proud. Victims' names vanished, but the scars stayed for centuries. What was the sickest punishment Rome ever invented? Let's break it down in the 20 most horrific torture methods used on women in ancient Rome. It's worse than you think. Let's start with number 20. Breast amputation. Roman law allowed extreme mutilation for slaves and non-citizens, and women in those groups had almost no protection. Breast amputation appears in late Roman persecution accounts as punishment tied to sexual refusal and religious defiance. Around 251 CE, during the Decian persecution, sources describe Agatha of Sicily having her breasts cut off after rejecting a Roman official. Historians treat the story as hagiography, yet they agree the method fits documented Roman patterns of gendered violence. Why target breasts? In Roman culture, breasts represented motherhood, nourishment, and sexual worth. Removing them attacked status, fertility, and identity at once. Officials understood symbolism. A wounded body taught lessons faster than laws ever could. Survival created lifelong damage. Medical writers note high risk of infection, blood loss, and chronic pain. Social damage followed. Disfigurement reduced marriage prospects and community standing, especially in honor-based cities. A woman carried the punishment daily, long after crowds left. This punishment also worked publicly. It told spectators that refusing male authority had visible consequences. Rome ruled through examples, not explanations. Here is the uncomfortable truth. This method was not random cruelty. It was state messaging carved into flesh. If a woman controlled her body, the state reclaimed it. Here comes number 19. Tongue removal. Roman courts relied on torture, and women without status paid the price. Legal texts from the 1st and 2nd centuries describe quaestio per tormenta, interrogation through pain, used mainly on slaves. Women questioned under torture had no right to silence. Their bodies became tools for evidence. Actual tongue removal rarely appears in formal court records, but cultural evidence fills the gap. Roman stories repeatedly punish women who speak too freely. The myth of Philomela, whose tongue was cut out to stop her accusation, shaped how Romans imagined justice. Speech from women felt dangerous. Training manuals for elite students included mock trials arguing a woman should be tortured until she says what judges expect. That detail matters. It shows how normal forced speech felt to Roman thinkers. Removing a tongue destroyed more than sound. It erased testimony, reputation, and legal presence. A woman without speech could not accuse, defend, or negotiate. Survival meant lifelong dependence and isolation. This punishment solved two problems at once. It stopped unwanted words and warned others to stay quiet. Control mattered more than truth. Once speech disappeared, Rome focused on another sense that shaped independence: sight. And the results stayed visible forever. That change reshaped lives. Let's move to number 18. Eye gouging. Roman punishment valued lasting reminders over quick deaths. Blinding delivered that perfectly. Later persecution accounts describe women having eyes destroyed during public torture, especially in religious cases. One of the best known is Lucy of Syracuse, traditionally dated to the early 4th century under Diocletian. Different versions exist, but all agree blindness defined her fate. Some say officials gouged out her eyes. Others say torture caused the damage. Either way, the result mattered more than the method. A blind survivor carried the sentence everywhere. For Roman women, sight meant independence. It allowed work, movement, and social interaction. Losing it forced dependence on family or owners. That dependency reduced marriage options and economic survival. Blinding punished the future, not just the moment. Scholars studying martyr accounts notice a pattern. Female bodies are attacked at the face, eyes, and chest far more often than male bodies. These areas held social value tied to beauty and honor. Damaging them changed how a woman existed in public. Blinding also avoided immediate death. Officials could punish, display, and release a victim to spread fear daily. The state erased vision so everyone else would remember obedience. Once sight was gone, Rome turned to methods of breaking bodies. Next one is number 17. Breaking on the wheel. Public execution in Rome aimed for visibility, noise, and time. Breaking bones delivered all three. Although the classic breaking wheel belongs to medieval Europe, Roman punishment already included bone-crushing methods using carts, beams, and frames. Bodies were stretched across wooden structures and struck repeatedly. Ancient descriptions emphasize delayed death rather than efficiency. Broken legs and ribs produced screams, collapse, and obvious deformity. That spectacle mattered more than speed. Women faced these punishments when labeled rebels, poisoners, or accomplices. Status decided everything. Roman citizens enjoyed protections that slaves and provincials lacked. A woman without citizenship had almost no procedural safety once condemned. Bone damage carried lasting consequences. Survivors lived with disability, pain, and dependence. Mobility vanished. Work options shrank. Families carried the burden of care, which spread the punishment beyond the individual. Historians describe Roman execution as public education. Crowds learned through watching bodies fail. Bent limbs and shattered posture stayed visible long after death. The image followed spectators home. This method turned the skeleton into evidence. Pain, movement, and collapse became part of the sentence. Rome used the whole body to teach hierarchy. That shift made punishment impossible to ignoring. Let's move to number 16. Iron hooks. Iron hooks appear in Roman torture descriptions from the early empire. Called unci or ungulae, these tools grabbed skin, lifted bodies, or tore muscle while victims remained alive. They allowed pain to continue in stages. Christian texts describing 2nd and 3rd century persecutions mention women suspended or ripped with hooks before execution. While faith shapes these accounts, historians agree the instruments themselves were real and commonly used by Roman officials. Hooks solved practical problems. They dragged bodies through public streets, lifted victims for display, and tore flesh without killing too quickly. Executioners could pause, question, then resume. Pain came in controlled waves. For women, hooks often targeted the chest, sides, or back. These areas bled heavily and stayed visible to crowds. The goal stayed consistent: create suffering spectators could follow step by step. Importantly, hooks kept victims alive. Death came later, after the message landed. A torn body hanging in public space forced people to watch, react, and remember. This punishment worked because it combined movement, injury, and display. One simple tool turned a person into a lesson. When tearing flesh proved effective, Rome learned weight alone could finish the job. That realization reshaped how Rome designed suffering to control everyone. If you're enjoying this story, give us hype for this video right now. Hit that subscribe button and drop a like so this series reaches every explorer out there. The next twist in this story is seconds away, and trust me, you'll want to be here when it drops. Here comes number 15. Crushing with weights. Roman punishment wasn't always sharp or bloody. Sometimes weight alone did the job. Records and archaeology show officials using heavy stones, beams, or mechanical frames to crush suspects, mainly slaves and women with no rights. The method squeezed bodies until joints popped, chests collapsed, or confessions came out. Why this approach? Rome believed pain proved guilt. Judges sometimes argued that the truth comes out under pressure, but history tells us fear worked better than accuracy. Women pinned under rocks had to answer questions while fighting to breathe. For some, it ended there. Others suffered broken bones and lifelong injuries. Medical risk was huge. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, and suffocation happened fast. The most common targets, women considered troublemakers, especially slaves accused of theft or poison. If a confession didn't arrive, the punishment kept going until there was silence. This wasn't about justice, it was about control, teaching everyone how light a life could be if the state called you worthless. Crushing was cheaper than iron, required no skill, and left marks no one could hide. This method turned weight into a weapon. Rome used gravity to show power, and to make sure pain never needed a blade. Let's move to number 14. Pitch and fire punishment. Roman rulers loved public warnings, and fire delivered the message loudest. After Rome's Great Fire in 64 CE, Emperor Nero lit his gardens with the bodies of condemned Christians, men and women. These victims were coated in pitch or oil, tied up, and burned alive as human torches. The fire wasn't just about execution. It was about making crowds remember the cost of stepping out of line. Even after Nero, burning with pitch became a punishment for arson, treason, or magical crimes. Records mention women rolled in sticky tar and set on fire in arenas or marketplaces. Burning stripped away more than life. Hair, clothing, and identity all vanished. For women, losing modesty in public was a penalty of its own. Medical writers later described the agony. Nerves fried, skin peeled off, and death came slow if the flames climbed upward. Spectators didn't forget. The smell of burning flesh stuck in everyone's mind, turning a punishment into a city-wide warning. The goal was simple: make the body itself a torch so everyone saw the cost. When the smoke cleared, Rome didn't stop with fire. The next step was hanging bodies in full view. Next one is number 13. Hanging in cages. Rome believed shame lasted longer than pain. After executions, some women found themselves hanging in iron cages or on public posts, bodies exposed for days, weeks, even longer. It wasn't just about death. It was about denying burial, which mattered deeply in Roman culture. If you were a slave or convicted criminal, hanging in a cage meant everyone saw your end. Stories from Lyon in the 2nd century mention the enslaved woman Blandina tied up for animals to attack, then left on display. Families couldn't claim the body or perform rituals. That meant no peace, no memory, just a public example. Cages were small and tight, sometimes built to match the victim's size. Guards left them high over roads or near city gates. Birds, weather, and curious crowds did the rest. Roman writers called it turning criminals into signposts. For women, the humiliation went further. Torn clothing and exposed bodies sent messages about modesty, shame, and obedience. Survivors, if any, were marked for life, but most simply vanished without a grave. When a cage finally emptied, the message stayed behind. This could happen to anyone. The next punishments reached inside women's bodies and futures.
Let's move to number 12.
Forced abortion punishment. Rome controlled more than crime, they controlled women's bodies too. Laws against poisoning and abortion meant elite women could be exiled or killed for ending a pregnancy. But for enslaved women, things were even harsher. Owners forced abortions, starved, or beat pregnant slaves when a birth seemed inconvenient. This wasn't rare. In fact, it was legal. Under the Lex Cornelia de Sicarius, anything from herbal drinks to rough handling could be labeled a crime. Rich families sometimes dragged women to court for trying to control their own fertility. Meanwhile, slave owners had total power, punishing, selling, or even forcing pregnancies for profit. One story from Carthage. A pregnant woman named Felicity couldn't be executed until giving birth. Guards waited, then sent her straight to the arena. Timing torture around childbirth turned pregnancy into another kind of sentence. Medical risks were high: hemorrhage, infection, even death from forced procedures. Emotional cost? Never measured. For Roman women, the law's real message was clear. The state decided if you became a mother or suffered for it. Rome's obsession with control led to even more violent methods. Soon, metal replaced politics: nails, iron, and blood. Here comes number 11. Nail piercing. Crucifixion is the Roman punishment everyone knows, but it wasn't just for men. Women, especially slaves and rebels, faced iron nails through wrists or ankles, hung on wood for all to see. Medical studies on old skeletons found nail marks in bones, so this method is more than legend. Why nails? It wasn't about killing fast. Nails drove through major nerves, causing agony and shock. The body struggled to breathe, arms and legs locked in pain. Roman records describe how victims could linger for hours or days, each movement a new wave of suffering. Death came from suffocation, blood loss, or exposure. Women on crosses lost more than life. Being stretched out in public meant total loss of modesty, honor, and identity. Crowds gathered, rumors spread, and families had no way to bury loved ones. Officials used crucifixion to show slaves and outsiders what happened to anyone who challenged power. Iron nails were cheap, but the message was priceless for Rome: obedience or humiliation and pain. This was suffering turned into a show. As Rome perfected public pain, they learned even hot metal could drag things out longer. Let's move to number 10. Burning with hot plates. Roman punishment didn't always mean open flames. Sometimes it meant getting pressed onto a red-hot metal plate, alive. Historians and martyr stories mention women forced onto glowing iron, often after other torture. These plates got so hot that skin and flesh sizzled on contact. But the idea wasn't instant death. It was slow, public agony. Medical experts say this torture cooked inherent and muscle, causing burns deep enough to scar for life, if the victim even survived. Executioners could adjust the heat, pull victims off, then press them back again. The longer the pain, the bigger the message. This wasn't random cruelty. For Roman officials, slow burning meant total control. They could punish specific body parts, like the chest, legs, or face, to leave clear marks. Female survivors bore the wounds openly. The scars were as much punishment as the pain. Crowds watched the skin blister and burn, hearing every scream. Officials wanted everyone to see what happened when someone challenged their rules or refused to obey. Hot metal was a weapon, but it was also a warning. After metal came blades. The crowd didn't go home. They waited for one final, unforgettable cut. Here comes number 9. Throat cutting, public execution. Roman executions could end with a single, practiced stroke. Beheading or throat cutting was seen as quick and honorable, but that's only after hours or days of torture. Women faced public decapitation for crimes like treason, blasphemy, or just standing against authority. Sometimes the last cut came in the arena with a huge audience. Why make it public? Officials wanted everyone to see the law in action. The sword or knife came down fast, but only after the body was already broken. Medical historians say victims arrived weak, dehydrated, and bleeding. The final blow just finished what torture began. Women from influential families sometimes got this fate to make an example. The message? Even the powerful weren't safe. For the crowd, the moment mattered. Heads rolled, blood spilled, and silence followed. If you were lucky, family could recover the body. If not, humiliation continued even after death. Beheading closed the show, but didn't erase what came before. Roman justice was about display, fast or slow, public or private. Once a head fell, officials often moved straight to the next punishment, proving control was always on schedule. If the sword didn't kill you, boiling liquid might. Let's move to number 8. Scalding with boiling water or oil. Roman punishment could get shockingly creative. Some women were tortured with boiling water, oil, or even molten lead. Liquids so hot, a splash could peel skin off instantly. Stories from late antiquity describe officials pouring boiling liquids over the body as a way to cause maximum pain without a quick death. Why use boiling liquid? It was cheap, easy, and brutal. Boiling oil was kept on hand for executions and interrogations. Medical accounts say burns this severe destroy skin, nerves, and muscle, causing agony and making survival unlikely. The real message wasn't about killing fast. Roman punishments loved to use everyday materials, water, oil, wax, to turn normal things into weapons. It was about showing that pain could come from anything, anywhere, even a kitchen pot. For women, this torture often followed other abuse. Surviving meant living with scars, disability, or infection. Dying meant a memorable, public ending. Audiences remembered the smell, the screams, and the lesson. The state owned your pain. This punishment didn't just end a life, it erased dignity. After boiling, Rome didn't let up. The next step forced victims to face the water in an even deadlier way. Next one is number 7, slow drowning. Romans invented some of history's strangest death sentences. Drowning was a top choice, sometimes slow, sometimes inside a sack with animals. The infamous penalty called poena culei had the condemned sewn in a leather sack with a dog, a monkey, and a snake, then tossed into the river. The law said this was for parricide, killing your own parent. But drowning also punished women accused of witchcraft, poison, or secret abortions. If the state wanted someone to disappear, water did the trick. No grave, no funeral, no way for family to mourn or protest. Death by water meant total erasure. The sack method sounds theatrical, but it worked. Victims suffocated and thrashed as the river dragged them under. Other times, officials just tied a woman to a stone and dropped her in. The whole point, no one saw you die, and nothing came back up. For women, this meant double punishment, death and disgrace, all at once. Romans believed denying burial was almost worse than killing. Family honor sank with the body. After the water settled, some punishments went right back to tearing flesh, piece by piece, for the world to see. Let's move to number 6. Flesh tearing with pincers. If you think whipping was bad, try iron pincers, heated up, then clamped on flesh to tear strips away. Martyr stories and Roman artifacts both show these claw-like tools used on limbs, chests, or faces. The pain was extreme and the scars permanent. Why pincers? They let executioners hurt someone slowly and publicly. Officials chose spots that bled and screamed the loudest. Historians say women were often targeted in places meant to shame, like the chest or face, so the whole city could witness both pain and humiliation. Roman crowds weren't squeamish. They watched as skin ripped and blood spilled. Officials paused between wounds, waiting for confessions or pleas for mercy. Sometimes the torture lasted hours. Survival was rare. Medical texts from centuries later describe these wounds as stages of pain. You didn't die all at once, but in pieces. Surviving meant living with shocking scars and public shame. Death was almost a release. For women, pincers turned the body into a warning, each wound a permanent message. Once the pincers cooled, Rome's punishments stripped away everything else, starting with dignity, then skin. Here comes number 5. Public stripping and lashing. Whipping in Rome wasn't done in private. Women, especially slaves or criminals, could be stripped naked and tied up right in front of crowds. Public lashes meant shame and pain rolled into one. The Roman scourge wasn't just a simple whip. It had metal or bone tips to cut deep and leave marks. People think only men got whipped, but Roman records and martyr stories show women humiliated in city squares or arenas, sometimes after being forced out of their clothes. Exposing a woman was punishment all by itself. Families and neighbors watched, and that humiliation stuck for life. Medical experts say the wounds weren't just bruises. Skin and muscle could be torn open, and the scars stayed visible forever. The crowd watched every strike. Sometimes a single punishment ruined someone's chances to marry or find work. If the victim fainted, the lashing didn't stop. Officials just poured water to wake her up. Survival meant living with scars and ruined reputation. For Rome, it was about turning one body into a lesson for hundreds. After the lashes, some women faced even harsher finishes, like losing their head. Rome's punishments never ran out of ways to end a story. Next one is number 4. Beheading after torture. Some Roman executions promised a quick end, but only after slow, brutal torture. Beheading was called merciful, compared to burning or crucifixion. But for women, it often came after hours of beatings, stripping, and public shame. High-status women got this fate to show that nobody was safe from Rome's reach. If accused of treason or blasphemy, a woman could be dragged out, beaten, and finally forced to kneel for the sword. The executioner's job was fast, but only after the audience saw enough suffering. Sometimes the condemned had to help guide the blade, showing total defeat. Family honor took a hit too. Confiscated property, public disgrace, and rumors followed surviving relatives. Roman law used beheading to prove a point. Obedience or humiliation, no middle ground. Historians say beheading seemed merciful only if you forgot what came before. For most, it was just the final act in a long ordeal. If the crowd wasn't satisfied, more spectacle could follow. With the sword put away, Rome used subtler methods next. Some deaths arrived quietly, with a cup of poison instead of a blade. Let's move to number 3. Poisoned execution. Not every Roman punishment ended in blood. Some women, especially elites, were executed with poison, a quieter but still terrifying end. Poison was tied to fears about women using herbs, magic, or secret recipes. The law called it beneficium, and being accused was enough to ruin a reputation for life. If convicted, a woman might drink poison behind closed doors, with only guards or officials as witnesses. No crowd, no spectacle, just a quiet, final moment. It could happen for real crimes or as a way for powerful families to cover up scandals. But not everyone got privacy. Women of lower status faced harsh treatment for the same accusation: flogging, burning, or exposure to wild animals. Poison was sometimes reserved as a gentler punishment, though the message was just as deadly. The state owns your secrets and controls who lives or dies. Surviving a poisoning attempt meant constant suspicion and social isolation. Friends and family often kept their distance, afraid of guilt by association. Poison finished things quietly, but Rome was never short on public lessons. When officials wanted absolute proof of power, they reached for stones and made an example everyone could see. Next one is number 2, crushing under stones. Imagine punishment where the weight is the message. In Rome, crushing under stones meant piling rocks on a body until the bones snapped or breathing stopped. This method punished both criminals and slaves, especially women accused of serious crimes or defiance. It wasn't quick, and it didn't need any special tools, just muscle and stone. Sometimes crowds joined in. Officials handed out rocks, letting neighbors and bystanders help finish the sentence. For the condemned, each stone added pain and pressure. Internal bleeding, broken ribs, and slow suffocation followed. Few survived long, but those who did were left broken for life. Why use this method? It was cheap, dramatic, and involved the whole community. Medical records from later centuries show victims with crushed chests, shattered limbs, and injuries that could never heal. Crushing wasn't just execution, it was a warning that anyone could become part of punishment. For women, this public display attacked both body and honor. Rome had one final lesson for rebels and outsiders, a punishment so public it turned the body into a billboard for power. And the last is number 1. Displayed crucifixion. Crucifixion didn't just happen to men. Women, especially slaves, foreigners, or those accused of revolt, were nailed or tied to wooden beams and left hanging in full view. Rome perfected this punishment to show who was in charge. It was cheap, slow, and unforgettable. Why so public? Crucifixion was designed to break the body and the spirit. Arms stretched wide, feet pinned down, victims struggled for every breath. Medical experts say most died from shock, suffocation, or blood loss. Sometimes the suffering lasted days. Passers-by watched, kids pointed, and rumors spread fast. For women, it was even worse. Clothes often slipped or tore, adding humiliation to pain. Families weren't allowed to bury the dead. Bodies stayed on display as a warning. Ancient writers described city roads lined with crosses after uprisings. The message was clear: cross Rome and your suffering will be on display for everyone. Crucifixion ended lives and erased honor. But for Rome, every cross was a public reminder. No rebellion went unseen, and no punishment stayed private. Some secrets stay hidden for a reason, but Rome's horrors refuse to die. If these stories shocked you, the next video will leave you speechless. Tap the next video. Another truth is waiting.